Leap the Dips, a legacy with an uncertain future. Once the oldest operating coaster in the world, until recently, when Lakemont Park announced that it would not be opening any of the rides for the 2024 season due to financial troubles for the park. The park claimed it would not be financially suitable for the park to operate the rides for the season. This grim news now makes Leap the Dips the oldest standing coaster in the world. As of now, the oldest operating coaster is Scenic Railway at Luna Park in Australia. This sparks the question of what the future may hold for this historic coaster. That is, if it has a future. For this reboot of Support Your Supports, there's no better coaster to honor than Leap the Dips. Honoring its past, its legacy, and discussing what could possibly happen to the ride in its future. This is Support Your Supports, Leap the Dips, the uncertain future of a legacy. Lakemont Park opened in 1893/94 as a trolley park. There is some uncertainty as to which year this park actually opened, so it's one of these 2 years. Later in 1899, Lakemont Park would open as an amusement park, opening with 2 rides, one of them being a carousel and another being a switchback wooden coaster called Gravity Railroad. This coaster was located where Leap the Dips currently sits today. Sadly, in 1901, Gravity Railroad was destroyed in a fire. The next year, in 1902, Leap the Dips would open in its place and remains there to this day. Leap the Dips is a figure-8 side friction coaster, designed by E.J. Morris, who patented the figure-8 design. This was a very common coaster model at the time. Many parks around the country and around the world had very similar models, or nearly identical versions of Leap the Dips. However, this model fell out of favor in the 1920s when John A. Miller created the upstop design. This added a wheel under the track, preventing the risk of the ride jumping off the track. This became the new standard for roller coasters, and side friction coasters would slowly start to die off. As of today, Leap the Dips is the only remaining side friction coaster in the world. Throughout the duration of the park and the coaster's history, both would go through periods of closure, new ownership, and refurbishments. In 1936, a flood would hit the park. Thankfully, this did not damage Leap the Dips all too much, but the owners of the park at the time decided to donate the park to the county after years of not making a profit off of the park. Donations were made locally, reaching over $10,000 to reopen the park, and the park did reopen in 1937. Fast forward to 1985, the park was once again facing financial hardship. The Boyer Brothers Candy Company proposed to buy the park and convert the park into a candy-themed park to compete with Hershey Park, which at the time had become a very successful attraction. Once the Boyer Brothers Candy Company bought the park, they added many new attractions, Skyliner being one of them and is still at the park today. They would also go on to rename the park Boyertown, USA. But during this remodeling and rebranding of the park, Leap the Dips was decommissioned, as the new owners did not find it profitable to operate the ride. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Fortunately, the new owners would not demolish the ride, it would only sit standing but not operating. Despite adding many new attractions and investing a lot into the park, the Boyertown USA project was a complete failure. Many locals lost favor of the park after the remodeling because admission was very expensive and the park lost a lot of its old school charm that everybody knew and loved. Boyertown USA would end up losing more money than Lakemont Park did before the buyout. In 1989, the park was bought out from the Boyer Brothers Candy Company by the current owners of the park today. The new owners had a lot on their plate to maintain all the new rides that Boyer had added to the park, while bringing back the original old school charm of the park. Sadly, even with new owners, Leap the Dips would still remain standing but not operating. In 1991, Leap the Dips was added to the National Register of Historical Places. It wasn't until 1993 when there were signs of the ride possibly becoming operational again. The Lakemont Park Historical Society opened a museum to celebrate the history of the ride, and would also go on to form the Leap the Dips Preservation Society, in hopes to possibly restore the ride and reopen it. To help with this restoration, ACE, or American Coaster Enthusiasts, would also assist with fundraising and raising awareness to locals about the project. This would lead citizens and many other private organizations and local banks to donate to the project. ACE was also able to get the ride to be designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1996, which is a much more difficult status to obtain. This was to raise awareness of the historic significance of the ride. By 1997, ACE was able to raise over $1 million to restore the ride, and restoration work would begin in 1998. Since the ride was officially a National Historic Landmark, the restoration process would have to use the same methods used back in the early 1900s to repair or replace parts of the ride. A steam box was used on site to shape the wood needed for the restoration, the same method used back when the ride was originally built in 1902. By this point, a lot of the wood on the structure had been rotten beyond repair and would have to be replaced. Despite this, they were able to keep about 70% of the original lumber from the structure. Leap the Dips would reopen on Memorial Day of 1999. Leap the Dips would continue to operate until 2016, when the entire park would remain closed for the 2017 and 2018 seasons. During this closure, Leap the Dips would go through more refurbishments, and many of the rides at the park would be removed entirely. The park would reopen in 2019, but Leap the Dips would not reopen until 2020. In early February of 2024, Lakemont Park announced that they would not open any of their rides for the 2024 season due to financial struggles. This announcement sparked much outcry and concern from the coaster community and from locals, but the park seems to be standing firm in this decision. And here we are today, asking ourselves what the future holds for this historic and iconic coaster. As we've seen from the history of this park and this coaster, this isn't the first time that this coaster's future seemed up in the air. While yes, this coaster is an ACE landmark and a National Historic Landmark, this ride is still not 100% safe from being demolished. Contrary to common belief, just because a coaster is labeled as an ACE landmark, that does not mean the ride can't ever be removed. ACE holds zero authority and power of the attraction itself. That power lies strictly within the owners of the ride. Sure, ACE can remove the ride's landmark status, but that's all that is, a label. There are two statuses that ACE can designate to a coaster. There is ACE Coaster Classic and ACE Roller Coaster Landmark. ACE Coaster Classic is the harder status to obtain, with specific qualifications that need to be met in order to achieve this status. The second status is ACE Roller Coaster Landmark, which only recognizes that a coaster holds some historic significance. This status doesn't have any specific qualifications. ACE can give this status to whoever they feel deserves it. ACE can also rescind these statuses. Blue Streak at Cedar Point was once labeled as an ACE Coaster Classic, but it was rescinded in 1995 when the buzz bars were replaced with ratcheting restraints and seat dividers were added. These modifications violated ACE's requirements for Coaster Classic status. Therefore, they rescinded the ride's label. Blue Streak would receive the ACE Coaster Landmark status in 2022. Back to Leap the Dips. This ride is one of few coasters in the world that holds both of these ACE statuses. But again, just because a ride holds these statuses does not mean the park must keep the ride. ACE cannot stop Lakemont Park from demolishing Leap the Dips. It would be a huge slap in the face to ACE if they did, given all that ACE has done to preserve the ride. But the bottom line is, ACE has no say whether Leap the Dips stays or goes. The same can be said for the National Historic Landmark status. This status is granted by the federal government if the building, place, or structure meets certain criteria. This status can also be rescinded if the criteria is no longer met. The one restriction against the owners removing the structure is if at any point the property or the structure was funded by the government, either on a state or federal level. This does not apply to Leap the Dips, because all funding for the ride was given by private or non-profit organizations or from local banks. To my knowledge and research, neither federal or state government has ever granted funds for Leap the Dips in its history. Here is the nomination form for Leap the Dips National Historic Landmark status. It's marked as public/local, not federal, not even state. There is one benefit to a National Historic Landmark that could entice Lakemont Park to keep Leap the Dips around. Being a National Historic Landmark, if it is a part of an income-producing property, they do qualify to receive federal and state tax credits. Sadly, there's no way that I can prove or even find out whether Lakemont Park does or does not get these tax credits. I would assume that they do though. Any company in their right mind would get any tax break that they can get. This doesn't mean that the ride has to be operational. As long as the ride is still standing, they can receive their tax credits. But if Lakemont Park really wanted to, they could still remove Leap the Dips. This ride has no protection from the federal or state government. It may lose them their tax benefit if they did remove the ride, but literally nobody could stop them. So, what does the future hold for this ride? Anything is on the table at this point. All we can do is speculate and hope for the best. Personally, I don't see Lakemont Park removing this ride. I think the owners are very well aware of how important this ride is. If anything at this park has to be removed, Skyliner would go first. Between that, and if Lakemont Park was really hinting that they were going to remove this ride, I could see either ACE or other private organizations pitching in to get this ride open again. Would this ride ever be relocated to another park? While I don't think it's impossible, I don't see that happening unless Lakemont Park decides to close entirely. If that were the case, I can definitely see this ride being bought by another park. The first park that comes to mind to me would be Knoebels. They're not too far away, and the park's atmosphere would fit perfectly for Leap the Dips. But again, I don't see this happening anytime soon. I got to ride Leap the Dips in 2020 on my Pennsylvania trip with Josh. This was easily the highlight of that entire trip. Josh and I rode the ride 8 times that day. We would have ridden more if it weren't for storms rolling in that day. The lead maintenance guy even gave us a backstage tour, taking us into the shed where the chain lift motor is, and he let us stand practically next to the track as the ride was running. This was such a huge honor to do as a coaster enthusiast, especially for such a historic ride. To this day, my visit to Lakemont Park is one of my favorite memories as a coaster enthusiast. The maintenance team even gave Josh and I a piece of the chain lift, which will forever be my most cherished piece of coaster memorabilia I'll ever own. If or when this ride does reopen, I will make damn well sure that I will visit this park way more often and cherish this piece of history that I'm lucky enough to have not too far from where I live. And I encourage all coaster enthusiasts to visit this park when the rides reopen. Give this park more reason to keep their rides operating and show them more love and support. Of all the supports to support, Leap the Dips may need it the most right now. It could possibly save the ride and ensure the ride's future. I really hope to see a large influx of coaster enthusiasts visiting Lakemont Park when the ride does reopen, and show support for the park and for the ride. In the meantime, go out there and support other smaller parks that may need the attendance. While bigger parks can be fun and have much bigger rides, smaller parks just have a charm to them that no large park could ever replicate. This is why I honestly prefer smaller family-owned parks rather than the large chain-owned parks. Atmosphere is everything to me. Small family-owned parks are a true treasure to still have around. Please give them as much support as you can. Leap the Dips will not be around forever. All rides come to an end eventually. I encourage everybody to appreciate every park that you visit and every ride that you ride. Because you never know when that park may close its gates, and you never know when that ride will give its final ride. Always appreciate the small things, and always support your supports. I'll catch you in the next loop.